Well, are you a Dungeons & Dragons player who loves the half-orc or half-elf characters? Not anymore can you play as them, according to Wizards of the Coast, the company that publishes the game, beloved tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons, because they say those groups are inherently racist. Okay, so this one's going to take a little bit of explanation, and full disclaimer, and my audience already knows this. Brianna is I'm so sad she's missing out on this conversation today. But I am a big Dungeons & Dragons nerd. I'm a dungeon master for several groups. We play a lot. You are very unfamiliar with Dungeons & Dragons.
Very unfamiliar.
Okay, so you pick a character. You've seen The Lord of the Rings or something like that,
absolutely.
right? Okay,
yeah.
So you pick a character, and there's a bunch of different races your character could be. Your character could be a gnome or a dwarf or an elf, or there's a million of them, and then you pick a class. Like, are you a ranger? Are you a paladin? Are you a cleric? Are you a fighter? And then based on what you've picked, there are certain traits that correspond to what you've picked. Like orcs can see in the dark. Elves don't need to sleep as long, and they live a lot longer. That kind of stuff. But you can also, there's specifically available half races. So you would say that you have a human parent and an elf. You have a human mother, elf father, so you're a half elf, and that has its own characteristics. But Wizards of the Coast is eliminating that, they say, because that's inherently racist. So they said this at a recent event they had. They're changing some things. They're actually changing the category race to species, which, again, I don't know why that's better. And also, I don't know why this is better, because they're basically saying you could design a character who is of mixed race, but what you're supposed to do, according to the new published materials, is you're supposed to pick one or the other. So I think this is actually just erasure of half-race characters. Is it not, Jason? Is it not?
Yeah, so the only thing that kind of made my elven ears perk up was the idea that they called it race, and then there were specific characteristics tied to that race, which I could see.
And they're not getting rid of that. That's the interesting thing here. They're not getting rid of that. There are still going to be characteristics, traits,
but they're not calling
it
race.
Well, they're going to call it species instead.
Okay.
But and
these species can't procreate.
Well, they can. Not all of them. Well, no, it's up to you to imagine it. You can make it up. To be fair to Wizards of the Coast, these are not like rigidly enforced. It's very clear from the published materials. You can do whatever you want. You can adapt the rules. You can change them. But the way they have it written so far is like, yeah, you can have interbreeding between humans and elves and between humans and orcs, and that would produce a half-elf and a half-orc. They don't have anything in the published materials for like elves and orcs getting together and having a fun time, and but I guess you could make that. You'd have to come up with, or your person running your game would have to come up with the characteristics are. But if you're a half-orc, there's specific characteristics, but they're getting rid of those because they say that's inherently racist. That just doesn't make sense to me. You could say that having traits based on race is inherently racist, I guess.
Right.
But they're not saying that because they're sticking with that. They are going to call it species instead of race, which I guess
I think species
is better, but
I'm not arguing for any of this because, like you said, I'm completely unfamiliar. But one of the things that I will say is that species would make more sense. Like, a dog and a cat can't procreate because they're different species.
But an elf and a human can procreate, even though they're if we're going to call them different species now. But that's not quite the same.
Yeah, no. Then I'm with you on it.
Yeah. There are some, like you can play a turtle person. You can play a minotaur is in the specifically published materials now. So I don't know. But the inherently racist description, which they said, is what perked up my ears about the story. Also, just because I'm obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like this is happening a lot now in entertainment, in various things where some sensitivity reader, that happens a lot in literature, and there were sensitivity readers involved here, or a DEI person, someone will just say something like, oh yeah, that's inherently racist, that's racist, you shouldn't do that. And then it's just like accepted without thought. Like I think if anyone thought about this for 5 seconds, this specific thing being racist doesn't make any sense. But they're just like, they're proceeding as if it is without any self-reflection, which I think happens a lot now in
but I don't even think it's DEI people. I think it's also, there are people on the right that again they get offended because there's a gay character in a cartoon, or they get offended by some book that mentions race and it's for kids. Like, I think all of those things are people being a little too sensitive. We read these things when we were kids. It didn't make us into bad people or didn't change our the way we view the world.
That was the moral panic with Dungeons and Dragons going back a long time was the Satanism panic. Was that there was a lot of freaked out parents that just totally it was wrong, that thought people were practicing actual witchcraft.
People did that with Harry Potter. That Satanism thing always seems to come back.
It's fun. Well, Harry Potter is now being canceled predominantly from the liberal direction because of what J.K. Rowling says about
the whole turf
her view of the transgender issue, which is kind of funny. Like Harry Potter's trajectory from something that certain very conservative religious people would object to now something that only the dyed-in-the-wool progressive liberals would object to for that reason.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, she's made billions of dollars off of it. I think she's going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, I just read that they're thinking about actually rebooting Harry Potter. That they're going to do. They're thinking of it as a television show with 7 seasons, each book being a season. I could not be more excited by this possibility. I think this is a great idea. I wish I got to be in charge of it. I would do the casting and the stories and everything. And but
I think Harry Potter's racist. They don't have enough black characters. No, I'm kidding. Only kidding.
You could be serious. I don't know.
No. Only kidding. I'm not really into Harry Potter.
Not a nerd guy.
Yeah, I like I said, I'm a cartoon nerd.
Nerd.
I watch a lot of old cartoons. And it's funny, I watch cartoons in Spanish so I can keep my Spanish skills up.
Interesting. You speak Spanish?
Yeah, so I watch He-Man in Spanish. They have episodes. If you listen to Skeletor in Spanish, he's hilarious.
What's his name in Spanish?
It's still Skeletor. Skeletor.
Like El Muerte or something. I took Spanish in grade school and high school and college, and today I speak not a single word of it.
That's because
it leaves you unless you watch cartoons in Spanish.
Yeah, I think a lot of it that's because of the way we educate. Number one, you start learning Spanish in middle school. You should learn Spanish if you were to go to a Spanish-speaking country, they start learning English from when they start school. And they take it and they learn conversational English, and it's a big part of their day. So these kids come out bilingual, at least, a lot of that is classed and depending on what school you go to. But I think here in the United States, we're like, hey, let's teach you how to read and how to write an essay that you'll never have to do, but we won't teach you how to communicate.
Yeah, right. I think about the years and years and years in my life I spent learning Spanish for no benefit to myself whatsoever, because I don't speak a word of it.
Right.
So what was the point of all that?
Right.
What's the point of this language instruction that we do for millions of kids in the U.S.?
I think
they just lose it.
Learning other languages is great. They say it's good for your brain. I think learning other languages, the more languages you can communicate in are positive for you. But I just think the way we teach it here, I took Spanish in high school, and I think in an 8-day cycle, I took it 3 days. You're not going to learn another language that way. You have to take it every day. You have to spend time speaking it. You have to spend time reading books in it. That's the only way you're going to learn. But, I was interested in my wife, and she's Spanish speaking, so I was like, I'm going to learn this language, Skeletor.
Go. Well, depending on which race you choose in D&D, there's a certain number of languages you know. So if you're an orc, you know Orcish. If you're Elven, you know Elvish, and maybe some others.
So if you
if you walk in both worlds,
if you're multi-species, racial?
I guess that's what we're going to call it now.
Yeah. Does that mean you know Elvish and Orcan, or does that mean?
Yes, I think it does. Yes.
Oh, so being biracial is almost like a superpower in the D&D world.
And they're getting rid of it. What a shame.
Too bad.
More Rising right after this.